Hello, BookTube, and welcome to Epic Comic Book Wednesday. This is a world's finest collaboration between Michael K Vaughan and myself, where we combine the forces of stately Vaughan Manor and Hyde Cottage to talk about the comic books on which we've wasted our youths. And this originally started as a feature on Mike's channel, where he was just browsing through his Epic collections, Marvel Comics full-color reprint line. And I horned in and have never left. I've been the guest who didn't go home. So since I horned into the event, he gets to pick what we talk about every week, which quickly expanded beyond Epic collections to all sorts of other stuff, including the real comic book company, DC Comics. But this week, we're going back to the basics. We're going back to our roots. We're doing an Epic collection. This Epic collection, War of the Pantheons, the Mighty Thor. This dovetails with something that Mike is doing on his own, 2020 Thor. He has decided to read every Thor comic from the beginning to the end of Volume 1 of Thor, that's a good 50 years of reading. You're going to hit some ups and some downs in that reading. Some ups and some downs. To put it mildly, you are. And this, you would think, would be a major downer, because the comics collected in this issue, in this Epic collection, immediately follow one of the greatest runs in Thor's history, the Walt Simonson run. That run was over. Walt Simonson was the writer and the artist, and he had moved on. No run can last forever. Although Roy Thomas and John Buscema certainly gave you the impression that one could with Conan the Barbarian, but nevertheless, no run can last forever. So Simonson moved on. Typically speaking, with a comic book run, a run is when a writer and an artist, or a writer/artist, takes over an ongoing book and suddenly does new things with it to make it feel fantastic, to make it must-read comic book reading. There are no runs anymore in superhero comic books from Marvel or DC, but once upon a time, they were a phenomenon, and you just prayed that you would be at the ground level for one of them. And typically, in the phenomenon of a run, it makes the issues right before it look bad, even if they're not. Another fairly celebrated comic book run, not fairly, very celebrated comic book run, is Frank Miller's run on Daredevil. And runs have a tendency to make what came before them look a little sick, but that's not true. The Daredevil issues before the Frank Miller run were pretty good. It's just Miller made them stratospheric. And typically speaking, what comes right after a run feels like a letdown. It feels like a disappointment, because the magic is over, and the chance of back-to-back runs, I know virtually no examples of back-to-back runs on a book. I was reading Thor. Thor is my favorite Marvel Comics character, so I was reading Thor all along. I was exultant with the Walt Simonson run. I was thinking, all right, suddenly at my local comic book shop, my LCS, suddenly everybody wants to read Thor. They don't think he's boring. Everybody wants to read him now. And now it's ending. I don't know what's going to come. And the next few issues after the Simonson run ends did feel like, I don't know if stumbles is the right word, but they were odd. They were inventory pieces. While Marvel lined up a new writer and a new artist and a new direction for the book, they did some inventory pieces, some canned stuff. Stuff that had just been in the locker and could be rolled out. They're not connected. The issues are not connected to each other. They're not connected to anything that came before them or anything that came after them in terms of direct storyline continuity. They're just inventory pieces. There's a little PS story to Marvel Comics' first Secret Wars, an issue that I really, really like. I've described it on this channel before. There's a crappy fill-in issue where Thor gets the paste beaten out of him by the Hulk. It shouldn't be as bad as it is, because it has A-list talent behind it, but the A-list talent, first of all, they don't match, and second, if you're going to do Thor versus the Hulk, you don't have 9-panel pages. Okay, you don't do that. That's your story is bigger than that. You'll ruin it if you do that. And the Hulk is out of character, Thor is out of character throughout the issue, and there's also a future storyline where a once and future Thor storyline where his hammer is just sitting there, but he's long gone. No explanation is given. And again, it's these fill-in issues, these inventory issues are fairly well done. But when I was reading them month by month, I was thinking, okay, but what is the new Thor going to be like? These issues aren't telling me anything. I'm just waiting. And then we get the opening issue of this new run of Thor, where, okay, Simonson gave us a Thor who wears ornate battle armor, a Thor who is bearded, a Thor who has a mask on, a helmet that covers his face. That was partially derived from a great storyline, but it's time for all of that to end. It's time for Thor to look normal again. So he does. He gets shaved, and he looks just like himself again. And we get a new creative team. The writer is Tom DeFalco, and the artist is a guy named Ron Friends. And Ron Friends, pretty early on in this run on Thor, it gets more pronounced as it goes on, but he decides to do something with his artwork that is unmistakable. It's unavoidable. He decides to copy earlier panel work of earlier artists. You can see it even on the cover. You won't, unless you're a diehard comic book fan, you might not know it, but that pose right there, this pose right here, especially this pose right here, that is just traced over another artist. A different artist did that first. But it becomes really obvious when you're looking at the panels. Now, the odd thing about Ron Friends, who does this all throughout these issues, is that he doesn't need to. There was an earlier Marvel Comics artist who did kind of sort of need to do this. When he doesn't do it, his artwork is pretty bad. His name was Rich Buckler. And he did a whole career out of imitating, panel by panel, tracing the artwork of earlier artists. And I loved it. I don't know of many comic book artists who didn't. Every once in a while you'd get a letters page for Thor. For instance, Rich Buckler did this kind of trace work for Thor for a long time, did for the Fantastic Four for a long time, where he would just go, what I mean by trace work, he would go to an old Jack Kirby issue of Thor or the Fantastic Four, find a panel set up with characters standing here, here, and here, and just redraw it. Just put tracing paper over it and draw that exact same thing. And every once in a while in the letters columns of those issues, you would get someone write in and say, you know, I've been in comics, I've been reading Marvel Comics for 25 years, and I've already paid for this artwork. Can you maybe get an artist for this book instead of somebody who's just regurgitating old panels? I could see that. I've always thought, I remember that letter, I think that letter occurred in a Thor letters column, and I've always remembered it. Because when I encounter artwork like this, I want to give you an example of what I'm talking about. It's not always going to be possible to do. Because, let me give you an example of what I'm not talking about. Here you go. This is Ron Friends' artwork. That is not anyone else's artwork. This is Ron Friends. He's an extremely kinetic artist and extremely, look at that. An extremely kinetic artist, much in the manner of not John Buscema, but John Buscema's brother Sal. When on his own, Ron Friends has a really good grasp of panel design, and he's a really kinetic artist. He really likes to do action. But let me give you another example here. An example of what I'm talking about. Let's see. All these earliest stories are just Ron Friends. And there's nothing wrong with that. Unlike Rich Buckler, Ron Friends can do his own artwork. Okay, here's an example. That is the splash page of this issue. This is issue number 388. That's the splash panel of this issue. Take away the costume. Put Thor's old costume on that panel, and this is the exact splash panel of a John Buscema panel from 20 years before. From a storyline that I've shown you on this channel that I really, really enjoy. So, of course, I am one of those older readers who looked at this and thought, I've already paid for this artwork. This is not anything different. This is you doing something that I've already seen. But it's fairly discreet. And it is often interspersed with pages like this that are just terrific. This is just Ron Friends' artwork. And in this opening storyline, when we get a story about the Celestials, it's a Jack Kirby creation. It doesn't make a lot of sense. It doesn't fit well with the rest of Marvel, but he did it, and you got to deal with them from now on. In the course of this story, where Thor fights against the Celestials, and this was made into a graphic novel of its own that I bought once upon a time. This storyline, was hatched out into a book of its own. In this storyline, we get a lot of of Thor as Ron Friends would draw him. But we also get stuff like this. This whole panel. There's Thor at the top fighting off this massive horde of creatures. And this is the design of the page. And if you are not a long-term comic book fan, you're going to look at this and think, boy, oh boy, that's dramatic, that's really good. But this is tracing over Jack Kirby. This panel occurred in a Thor comic book before now. Thor is, it's all exactly the same. It's not explicitly traced, but it is exactly the same. It is, I guess you could call it an homage to Kirby. But when I see panels like that, I think what that old letter writer wrote. I think I've already paid for this artwork. It'll be interspersed with stuff that's brand new. Thor being broken down to his elemental particles. That is brand new. But once the Celestial storyline is over, and Thor is restored to himself, he's restored to, this is the Thor that we're going to get in this run of the book. So not armored, not bearded, nothing like that. Once that happens and Thor goes back to Earth, we get two things. An enormous plot line involving the Egyptian gods. It also involves the Irish gods, the Celtic gods. Versions of them anyway. They're unrecognizable from Irish mythology, but they are there. It involves them, but it involves mainly the Egyptian god of death, Seth. Seth is the Egyptian god of death. He's the villain of most of the rest of this book. He is allowed to have his way and create havoc in Asgard and everywhere else because Odin is missing again. The king, the all-powerful king of the Norse gods, Thor's father, is missing again. Guy, I swear, we're going to be getting to this. He's a disaster. He's just a disaster. When he's around, he's being a psychopathic, controlling helicopter dad. Or making horrible decisions. Or both. And when he's not around, he's either a fetch quest that Thor has to risk his life to find and rescue, or he's being impersonated by a bad guy. But Thor in this storyline teams up with the Avengers at a weird period in their history, just as the Egyptian god of death is attacking all of reality, including Earth. And we get a terrific sequence. Again, it is stolen from an earlier comic book, but we get a terrific sequence. That guy in black is Captain America. He's got a metal shield. He's got roughly the same Captain America uniform, but he's not actually Captain America at the time. And it's in this comic book, when Thor is being briefly overwhelmed and it does not have access to his hammer, it's in this context that for once and all we see that the enchantment on Thor's hammer, which says, whosoever holds this hammer, if he be worthy, shall possess the power of Thor. The enchantment on Thor's hammer does not say this hammer belongs to Thor. It says you can wield this hammer if you're worthy. And in this issue, in Marvel Comics, in Marvel continuity, we get the fact that Captain America is worthy to wield Thor's hammer. This is going to be a massive payday in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. That what I consider to be the last true Marvel Comics movie has Captain America wielding Thor's hammer, and it's wonderful. And that's why. This is where it comes from. The far stronger people, the Thing, the Hulk, whatnot, cannot budge the hammer because they're not worthy. But Steve Rogers is. And that's also a fantastic panel. That is, it isn't explicitly Kirby-esque. It's far more... these are far more Buscema-esque than Kirby-esque. But as Seth's villainy increases, boy oh boy does that change. we get some terrific moments. At one point, Thor is teaming up with Spider-Man, and they are at the bottom of a gigantic high-rise, and the villain knocks out the support columns, and Thor has to support the whole thing on his own as a testament to his strength. Spider-Man would be squashed flat. Thor has to hold this whole thing up on his own. And he does, but it is rapidly becoming beyond him. And here you get a good objective yardstick of the difference between Marvel and DC. Because Thor is one of the strongest characters physically in the Marvel Universe. He has class 100 strength, meaning he can lift 100 tons or more. Of course, this building is several thousand tons. But he can lift 100 tons or more, so he's much stronger than Spider-Man, but he's not infinitely strong. In DC Comics, Superman would never get tired. If he were at the bottom of this building and needed to hold it up, he could do so forever, literally forever. So could Supergirl. So could Wonder Woman. So could Green Lantern with his ring, provided he could recharge his ring. He could do that too. Martian Manhunter, probably. But Captain Marvel, easily. There is no upper limit to their strength, so this is not a challenge. Which I guess some fanboys will say that makes Marvel more interesting to read. I suppose that will. Some people will say that. But as this storyline progresses, we get a few red herrings here. One of which literally is Daredevil, where he fights Hogan the Grim, a random Asgardian comrade of Thor's. And we get terrific Ron Friends artwork is still prevailing in some of these panels. At one point, the villain, she gets revealed to her that Thor is incredibly powerful. He's not just some costumed Avenger. He's a god. That is wonderful. The shadow work there, the panel work there, that is not anything that Jack Kirby would ever have done. Not like that. But that starts to change. As this storyline goes on and Thor needs to take the fight to Asgard, he needs to heal his friend with a blood transfusion and go to Asgard to fight Seth, the villain. This is all Kirby. And gradually, as this storyline progresses in Asgard, all of this becomes Kirby. So all of this is what you have already seen. I have already paid for this artwork. Panels like this, these are identical to Jack Kirby panels from 20 years before. And it's not a little anymore. It barely happens at all anymore. All of this is just the longtime Thor fan. When Ron Friends gets to this level of tracing, the longtime Thor fan, the only game they play is, can you explicitly pick the issue? Do you remember exactly where you saw this panel before? And that gets a little bit thin for me. I disliked seeing so much of this. I wanted more of Ron Friends because Ron Friends is very good when he does his own artwork. I wanted more of that, and I just didn't get enough of it. When it wasn't Ron Friends doing Jack Kirby, it's Ron Friends doing John Buscema. When it's not Ron Friends doing John or Sal Buscema, it might be him doing early Steranko or somebody like that. But it's too seldom him. He's moving around all of these pieces, and that makes it interesting. These issues are really, really interesting, and the character work is really good. But I don't read comic books for the writing or for the character work. I read them for the artwork. And too often in this Asgardian story, it's Jack Kirby's artwork that I'm getting. Although the writer here does a good job with some interesting bits and pieces. So there are some interesting character bits here. At one point, it looks like Heimdall, for instance, the guardian of Asgard, is dead or is dying. And in this, briefly, he is in love here with a character called the Enchantress, a villain in the Thor universe called the Enchantress. And when she thinks he's going to die, she becomes incredibly outraged at the Egyptian god of death. She says, "We are gods, immortals, rulers of the heavens. Our lives should be filled with endless pleasures and indolent whims. Heartbreak and grief are for lesser beings, not us. Not us. We are not supposed to die." And moments like that are really good. And here are the Celtic gods. I don't really get anything about them, but see, you get stuff like this that is warmed over John Buscema or warmed over Jack Kirby. And it doesn't help that in these latter issues the inking is poor. Who do we have for the inker? Romeo Tanghal. Yeah, see, look at that. You look at that. If you're a first-time reader of this book, you look at that and you think how incredible that is. But that is lifted from both Jack Kirby and John Buscema. The only poignant part of this panel, this 2-page panel where Thor sees visions of dread, is that right there. Underneath the visions of dread is the Twin Towers, which didn't exist when Kirby drew this panel for the first time, and doesn't exist anymore. So it puts your heart in your throat for that moment. But the storyline goes on with just Kirby-esque artwork, Kirby-esque action sequences. At this point in the storyline, Balder the Brave, Thor's brave companion in arms, is king of Asgard because Odin is, of course, missing. And Balder has all of Odin's power. And even when it's not Odin wielding that power, it's still bad. All of it is just a disaster. The minute Balder gets his hands on Thor's power, he decides it'd be a good idea, or gets his hands on Odin's power, he decides it would be a good idea to sap Thor's power. Odin does that all the time in earlier storylines, and it never works out well. It's always a bad idea. Balder does it anyway because he's got Odin on the brain. And if you've got Odin on the brain, you're going to make bad decisions. But eventually, Odin is found. He is returned. Even little panels like this is a straight lift of an earlier Jack Kirby storyline that I actually showed you. But we want a big 400th issue of Thor, and in the 400th issue of Thor, he faces Surtur, the fire demon, who, to put it mildly, featured prominently in the Walt Simonson run. Here he's back, and God Almighty, okay, you get it's all Kirby here. It's all just this issue. Issue number 400 is all Kirby. But if you want, it's good. It's very energetic, but it's all Kirby. If you're a longtime Thor fan, you've seen all these panels before. And if you are following what even now, even when this was being done, was well regarded as one of the greatest Thor runs of all time, probably it's not a good idea to bring back that villain. Probably it's not a good idea to invite explicit comparisons with that run because you cannot measure up. You simply cannot measure up. And this run doesn't. It's rehashed Jack Kirby artwork with Thor fighting Surtur the Flame Demon, which we've already seen. Better than this. There's no way around that. Eventually, Thor and Odin fight Surtur, and here, I don't so much mind the Kirby homages. I mean, Friends is adding enough atmospheric detail, color differences, motion lines, to make it seem a little bit new. But this right here, that visual effect is from issue number 200 of Thor, which I bought on the newsstands. It's way too close. The mimicry is way too close in a lot of these panels. I mean, look at that. It's great. It's big and soaring on its own, but I've seen it before in exactly this kind of storyline. And at the end of the storyline with Surtur, when Thor and Odin are victorious, they're looking at, a downed, unconscious Surtur. How flame demons go unconscious, I don't know. Do they have brains in brain cases? They have to figure out what to do with them. And Odin comes up with a brilliant idea. I swear, this guy is the #1 loser in the entire Marvel Universe. He comes up with a brilliant idea. He will absorb the very essence of Surtur into his own self. That's the only cage that can hold this fire elemental. That's the only way we know he'll be safe and sound. What could possibly go wrong? I tell you, oh my God. And then we have a happy ending, and the rest of the book, which is not a small amount, the rest of the book is why you get an epic collection. Because they include everything. You get everything in the back of here. All sorts of backup features that were in Thor number 400, for instance. We get a full breakdown of his personality and his powers and his secret identity. We get a full look at the Thor Corps, all these different characters who can lift Thor's hammer. We get a breakdown of all of the female cast members, Jane Foster and Lorelei and the Enchantress and the goddess Sif and Hela, the goddess of death. In the current Thor continuity, in the Thor comic that's currently coming out from Marvel Comics with beautiful Alex Ross covers, all 5 of these characters are lesbian. And always have been. Didn't you notice? Bigot. It's kind of amazing. It's kind of amazing that Lorelei and the Enchantress and Jane Foster and Sif and Hela, the goddess of death, are now all lesbian in Marvel Comics. But you get these backup features, and then you get other backup features as well. Little things that are all included here. The only thing that's not in this epic collection that I really wish were, one of the things that's in here, I think, if I remember correctly, is the cover. This is the cover of that original Thor trade paperback where he fights the Celestials. This is the cover of that. I had this issue, this graphic novel, this trade paperback once upon a time. I don't have it anymore. No idea what became of it. I don't need it anymore because not only are all those issues included in here, but they even give you the cover. that's the neat thing about this Epic Collection. Epic Collections just in general is that you really get your money's worth. They include all sorts of extras. They don't just winnow or curate for you. The only thing that's missing here that I think should be in every Epic Collection is the appropriate entries from the official handbook of the Marvel Universe. Thor's entry, Sif's entry, here the Black Knight's entry, or Suitor's entry. Those should be in here. You've got the pages. Why not include them? They're fun. But what is the verdict here? Well, I mean, this run is energetic. It was not just the doldrums. These are not the doldrums. These issues were fun to collect. They were fun to read. Once they got over the inventory pieces at the beginning, I was happily reading Thor in every new issue. And they stay good. For a long time, they stay good. Ron Friends on Thor. I know I've been complaining about him tracing Jack Kirby and John Buscema's artwork, but he's still really enjoyable. He's still really energetic as an artist. So I was enjoying Thor, even though it was right in the shadow of one of the greatest runs on this character ever. Most people would say that the Simonson run is the greatest run on Thor ever. I say second greatest, but I still give it the props that it's due. And that is our comic for today, for Epic Comic Book Wednesday. It's an actual Epic collection, which the Walt Simonson run on Thor does not have an Epic collection, or two. They're too busy milking that for all it's worth with far more expensive reprint volumes. But this was an excellent choice. This was not Michael K. Vaughan punishing me at all. This was not Howard the Duck, or Space Trucker, or Night Mask, or whatever. So we will see whether or not this luck holds for next week. And I'll be here either way. So I'll wrap this up now, and I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.